Imagine walking into an office closet late at night, expecting to find nothing more than clutter. Old cleaning supplies, forgotten files, and dust-covered shelves. But instead, what you uncover is so shocking that it unravels a billion-dollar empire and exposes secrets that no one, not even the authorities, could ever have anticipated. For Eric Donald, the 70-year-old disabled janitor, what began as a normal shift at Bridges Enterprises turned into a nightmare that would send shockwaves through the entire town of Charlestown. Hidden beneath decades of dirt, forgotten behind piles of cleaning supplies, he uncovered a discovery so staggering that it would unravel the mystery of a missing billionaire CEO and her family's dark secrets. What he found would change not just his life, but the fate of Susan Bridges, her children, and the world around them. The town of Charlestown was as peaceful as a postcard. Its streets, lined with quaint little shops and cozy homes, rarely saw the kind of chaos you'd expect from a place of great fortune. But there was something about the town's towering Bridges Enterprises that commanded attention. Standing proudly on the skyline, the building glittered like a beacon of success, embodying everything that Susan Bridges had worked her entire life to build: wealth, influence, and power. Susan, the self-made billionaire CEO, had once been the heart of the town. Everyone knew her name, her story, her remarkable rise from humble beginnings to the head of one of the world's most influential companies. 45 years old, pregnant with twins, and with a family that seemed perfect in every way, she appeared to have it all. Her children, Lucas, 12, and twins Barbara and Beatrice, 7, were often seen in the public eye, playing in the park, accompanying their mother to business functions, their faces always glowing with a carefree joy. But one morning, without warning, Susan Bridges vanished. The entire town was thrown into disarray. Was she kidnapped? Had she fled from something or someone? Was it an internal family issue, or was there something more sinister at play? The media stormed into Charlestown, amplifying the mystery, but despite their relentless coverage, the case seemed to grow colder by the day. The police launched a massive search, deploying the latest technologies and resources. But all they found were disjointed leads and fragments of clues that only deepened the confusion. Amid the chaos, a cryptic note surfaced, written in Susan's unmistakable handwriting. The message was short, but chilling. "They know about the girls. They will come for them. Don't trust anyone. The twins, they're not what you think. I've hidden them, hidden the truth. If they find this, it's too late. Run. Please tell them to run." The police had no idea what to make of it. Who was they? Why was Susan warning someone, and what did she mean by the twins not being what they seemed? Was it just paranoia, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The townspeople speculated wildly. Some suggested kidnapping, others hinted at blackmail or family secrets that Susan had hidden away. No one could figure out the truth. But one thing was certain: Susan's disappearance was tied to something far deeper and darker than anyone had imagined. As the mystery deepened, no one expected the answer to come from the last person anyone would have suspected: Eric Donald, a 70-year-old janitor. Before this story unfolds, take a moment and ask yourself, what would you do if the world you thought you knew was turned upside down by a single act of kindness? Every choice in life has its consequences, and sometimes it only takes one moment to change everything. If you're ready to witness a story that will tug at your heart and challenge everything you believe, then subscribe now. Comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Don't miss the truth that's about to unfold. It could change you too. Eric Donald had worked for Bridges Enterprises for decades, sweeping its gleaming hallways and maintaining the spotless floors that had once been the pride of the company. He was used to being invisible, a shadow that no one noticed. With his crippled legs, a result of years of hard labor, and his fading health, Eric had long since resigned himself to being a man who had lived unnoticed by everyone, even Susan Bridges, the very woman whose empire he helped clean. For years, Eric's job had been the same: maintain the building's aging offices, clean the windows, mop the floors. It was a quiet life, far from the spotlight, but it was a life he knew. Yet lately there was a palpable shift in the air. Something felt off. Susan's disappearance had sent ripples through the company, and the once bustling headquarters now felt like a hollow shell, stripped of its warmth. The employees who used to fill the halls with conversation and laughter were now absent, replaced by a cold silence. The once beautiful office spaces now felt lifeless, empty, almost abandoned. The usual energy that Susan brought with her, a dynamic presence that could fill an entire room, was missing, and the company was slowly crumbling under the weight of her vanishing. Eric didn't know it at the time, but this evening would be different from any other. It was a few hours past closing time. The building was quiet, save for the flickering of overhead lights and the sound of Eric's old cart rolling through the halls. He was finishing his rounds, wiping down glass windows that overlooked the darkened skyline of Charlestown. His tired eyes scanned the hallway, reflecting on the strange shift in atmosphere since Susan's disappearance. Eric had seen it all: the rise of Bridges Enterprises, Susan's meteoric success, her children growing up in the shadows of wealth and influence. But lately, he'd noticed strange things. Little rituals the twins would perform in the hallways when no one was looking. Secretive glances exchanged between the children. Susan's growing protectiveness, always steering people away from her family, shielding them from prying eyes. Why? His mind was still tangled with these thoughts when, in the dimly lit corridor, he noticed something odd. A maintenance closet that he hadn't visited in years stood slightly ajar. The door was barely open, as if it had been left that way on purpose. There was a strange pull to it, an inexplicable force that made Eric's breath catch. He rolled his cart closer and pushed the door open, the creaking hinges reverberating in the stillness. The closet was nothing more than a dusty room filled with forgotten supplies: cleaning rags, old brooms, boxes of unused paperwork. Nothing that would warrant attention. But there, hidden beneath layers of neglected objects, was something that sent chills down his spine. A wooden box. Eric paused, his old hands trembling as he reached for the box. It felt wrong, like it was never meant to be uncovered. But the pull to open it was overwhelming. He slid the box toward him and slowly, with an effort that strained his failing muscles, lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, eerie, blurry, unsettling images of Barbara and Beatrice, Susan's twin daughters. But what chilled him wasn't just the photographs. It was the figures in the background, their faces shrouded in shadow. The twins were smiling, but the smile didn't reach their eyes. Something was off. It was as if they were too perfect, too unnaturally in sync. The unease in Eric grew stronger as he sifted through more pictures, each one more cryptic than the last. And then there was the note, a crumpled sheet of paper, stained with ink. His hands shook as he unfolded it, reading the frantic words scrawled in Susan's familiar handwriting. "They know about the girls. They will come for them. Don't trust anyone. The twins. They're not what you think. I've hidden them, hidden the truth. If they find this, it's too late. Run. Please, tell them to run." Eric's heart pounded in his chest. The words were like a slap, each syllable more jarring than the last. Who were they? What truth was Susan hiding, and why had she left this warning for him, of all people? The questions swirled in his mind, but one thing was certain. Susan Bridges had been keeping secrets. Terrifying secrets. Eric stood in the darkened room, clutching the note as the weight of the discovery settled heavily on his shoulders. He had been cleaning these halls for years, but he had never known that darkness had been hiding in plain sight. Now, the quiet janitor found himself tangled in a mystery so deep, so dangerous, that he couldn't turn back. The piece of paper he held was just the beginning. The truth about Susan, her family, and the legacy she had built were all part of something far greater, far more dangerous than Eric could have ever imagined. Charlestown, once a town of peace, was about to be thrust into chaos. As Eric tried to steady his breathing, his thoughts turned to the twins, Barbara and Beatrice. Their behavior, their strange connection to Susan, the secretive nature of their upbringing, it all started to fit together, like a jigsaw puzzle with far too many pieces. The town was about to learn the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. Eric stood in the dim light of the maintenance closet, the cold metal of the box still trembling in his hands. The faint hum of the fluorescent light above buzzed in his ears as his mind struggled to process what he had just uncovered. He couldn't quite understand it, couldn't piece it all together yet, but one thing was clear. He had stumbled upon something far darker than any of them could have imagined. His hands shook as he tucked the crumpled note back into the box. Susan's frantic warning was still burned into his mind. They know about the girls. They will come for them. Don't trust anyone. The twins, they're not what you think. I've hidden them. Hidden the truth. Who were they? Who was Susan trying to protect her children from? And why had she left this note for him, a man so far removed from her world? Eric's breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to steady himself. His mind raced, but his body rebelled against the effort. He gripped the box tighter, feeling its edges digging into his worn hands. For years, his life had been nothing more than routine. Sweeping floors, cleaning windows, maintaining the offices of Bridges Enterprises. It was a quiet existence, a life that had become predictable, comfortable even, in its monotony. But today, everything had shifted. The weight of Susan's words was too much to ignore. He was no longer just the janitor. He had found something terrifying that could change everything. Eric Donald had spent over 3 decades in the halls of Bridges Enterprises. He knew the place better than anyone. The floors, the rooms, the whispers of conversations that would echo through the building as employees passed by. He was always in the background, a silent observer, never the center of attention. He had long ago resigned himself to the role of the invisible worker, the one who cleaned up after everyone else, never asked questions, and never sought recognition. At 70 years old, Eric's body had begun to show the toll of a lifetime of physical labor. His legs, once strong from years of hard work, were now stiff and weak, incapable of carrying him like they used to. The pain was constant now, a dull throb that never truly went away. He had accepted it, just like he had accepted the fact that he would never be a part of the Bridges family. He was just a man doing his job. But in recent weeks, things had changed. Not just physically, but within the walls of the company. Since Susan's disappearance, the once bustling halls of Bridges Enterprises had grown eerily silent. Employees no longer lingered for late meetings, and the buzzing of phones had been replaced with a tense stillness. It was as if the heartbeat of the company had slowed, as if the building itself had become hollow. Eric had noticed it all. The way the employees avoided eye contact, the way people looked over their shoulders as if they were being watched, the whispers that started to swirl behind closed doors. He had seen the subtle shifts before, the undercurrents of tension, but now it was impossible to ignore. Something dark was festering just beneath the surface. Yet despite the upheaval, Eric had continued his work. He had always been good at maintaining routine, and that was what kept him grounded. He swept the floors, cleaned the windows, emptied the trash bins. The office may have been filled with uncertainty, but Eric found solace in the simplicity of his tasks. They gave him something to hold on to. It was on one such evening, as the shadows of twilight began to stretch across the office floor, that Eric noticed something strange. The door to one of the maintenance closets, a room he hadn't entered in years, was slightly ajar. It was the smallest of openings, just wide enough for him to peek through. Eric felt an odd, inexplicable pull toward it, like a silent invitation to uncover something hidden. The hall was eerily quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed muted. He felt a strange chill run down his spine as he approached. The closet itself was a forgotten space, filled with cleaning supplies, old mops, brooms, and boxes of paperwork that had long since gathered dust. It was easy to overlook, easy for people to forget about it in the rush of their busy lives. But there was something about it tonight, something that felt different. Eric pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking with age. Inside, the smell of dust and stale air filled his lungs. His eyes scanned the cluttered room. But it was the wooden box tucked beneath a pile of discarded papers that caught his attention. His heart skipped a beat. He recognized it immediately. It wasn't something he had seen before. It wasn't part of the usual clutter that had built up over the years. This box had been placed deliberately out of sight. His fingers trembled as he bent down to pull it closer. He had no idea why, but he felt like he shouldn't open it. He'd lived a life of avoiding trouble, of staying out of everyone's way, of doing his job and moving on. But something urged him to lift the lid. It was almost as if the box had been waiting for him. The moment his fingers touched the lid, a cold shiver ran through him. He opened it. Inside the box were photographs that made Eric's blood run cold. The first picture he saw was of Barbara and Beatrice, the twins. They were standing together, holding hands, their faces smiling in that strange, eerie way that seemed almost too perfect. But it wasn't the smiles that unsettled Eric. It was the figures surrounding them. Shadowy figures, their faces hidden by darkness. Figures that had no identity, no clarity, only the unsettling impression that they were watching the girls. Eric's fingers trembled as he shuffled through more pictures. Each one was more disturbing than the last. The twins, always together, always smiling. But the background was always different, always obscured by darkness. There were no clear edges to the images, just blur and shadow. Then, at the very bottom of the box, Eric found the note. He unfolded it slowly, a sick feeling twisting in his stomach as he read the frantic handwriting. They know about the girls. They will come for them. Don't trust anyone. The twins. They're not what you think. I've hidden them. Hidden the truth. If they find this, it's too late. Run. Please tell them to run. The handwriting was smeared, the ink running as if Susan had written it in a hurry. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a warning, it was a desperate cry for help. Susan had known something. She had been hiding the truth, and now it was clear. The twins were at the center of something far darker than anyone realized. Eric stumbled backward, the weight of the discovery crashing down on him. His pulse raced, his breath shallow. Who were these shadowy figures? And why was Susan warning him about the girls? What did she mean by the truth? The answers seemed just beyond his grasp. The more Eric thought about it, the more he realized one thing: this wasn't just about Susan's disappearance. This was about something much bigger, something older and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Eric stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of what he had uncovered. The room felt colder now, as if the very air around him had shifted. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to understand what this all meant. Susan Bridges had been hiding something. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, were at the center of it all. As Eric stared at the photographs and the note, he couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was only the beginning. The town of Charlestown had always been quiet, peaceful. But that peace was about to be shattered. Something far darker was at play, and Eric was the only one who knew. The mysteries surrounding Susan's disappearance, the cryptic note, and the chilling photographs. He couldn't ignore them any longer. He had to know the truth, and whatever he uncovered next would change everything. The town of Charlestown was about to learn that the darkness they had never noticed was hiding just beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. Eric couldn't shake the haunting images from the box. The photographs of Barbara and Beatrice, Susan's twin daughters, clung to his thoughts like a persistent fog. What had he uncovered in that dusty, forgotten maintenance closet? What did Susan mean by, "The twins aren't what you think"? The cryptic words, written in ink smeared by panic, twisted inside his chest. His heart still pounded with the weight of the discovery, but now, more than ever, Eric knew he had to understand what had been hidden from everyone, especially him. The town had already felt the tremors of Susan's disappearance, but Eric's discovery made it personal. He hadn't just found a pile of old photos. He had found a secret, buried beneath the surface of Bridges Enterprises, a secret that tied into the twins. A secret that, if left alone, could threaten not only his life, but the very fabric of the world he thought he knew. The days following his discovery were a blur. Eric couldn't stop thinking about the twins. Their smiles in the pictures had seemed too perfect, too eerie. Something was off about them, something that had never sat right with him. Eric had worked at Bridges Enterprises for decades. He knew the kids. He saw them running through the halls sometimes, Barbara always with her twin sister, their footsteps in sync, always together. But over the years, Eric had kept his distance. Children were off limits for someone like him, a janitor. He didn't ask questions, and he didn't pry. His job was to clean, maintain, and stay out of the way. That had always been enough for him. But after what he had uncovered, his perception of the twins had changed. They weren't like other children. Barbara and Beatrice didn't speak much, but when they did, their words held a strange weight, like they were too wise for their age. Their eyes always seemed distant, like they were seeing something beyond the room, beyond the people around them. Eric had seen them 100 times, playful, innocent, and always together. But now, he noticed the little things, the way their movements were unnervingly synchronized, as if they shared a private rhythm, an unspoken understanding. It wasn't normal. It wasn't right. Their behavior suggested something deeper, something that Eric wasn't prepared to confront. He'd observed them before, but now he scrutinized their every action. It was hard to explain, but it felt like they were waiting for something. Like they knew something was coming, something that they had been preparing for. Every moment they spent together seemed rehearsed, practiced, like a routine they had been perfecting for years. Susan's overprotectiveness about her daughters had never seemed all that strange. Every mother had her quirks, and Susan had always been the type to keep her children close. But Eric had started to see the signs of something more troubling. Susan had never allowed anyone, not even the employees of Bridges Enterprises, to get too close to Barbara and Beatrice. Whenever they were in the building, Susan was always nearby, hovering, watching, her gaze sharp, almost as if she feared someone might uncover what she was trying so desperately to hide. It wasn't just the regular motherly instinct. No, this was different. Eric could sense it. There was a hidden, desperate edge to Susan's protectiveness, a fear that gnawed at the edges of her carefully constructed empire. Eric had seen it firsthand. He had cleaned the offices where Susan worked late into the night. During those late hours, the building would be silent except for the faint hum of machines and the soft rustling of papers. He'd occasionally catch glimpses of her through the windows of her office. Susan, hunched over her desk, eyes never leaving the work in front of her, while Barbara and Beatrice played silently at her feet. At times, they would stare at Eric from across the room, their wide eyes unsettling him. They never asked for anything, never approached him, but they always seemed to be watching him, as though they were studying him. Eric had always believed the twins were simply very well behaved, but now, after what he had discovered, he started to question everything. Had Susan been keeping them isolated from the world to protect them? Or was she hiding them from something far worse than the world outside? The deeper Eric delved into the mystery, the more he began to feel that Susan wasn't just protecting the twins from outsiders. She was protecting everyone else from them. As Eric reflected on Susan's behavior, the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. There was always something unnervingly secretive about her business practices. Susan was a powerful woman, yes, but Bridges Enterprises was no ordinary company. The business empire Susan had built from the ground up had never fully revealed its true nature. The company's public image was flawless, sleek, efficient, and highly profitable. But as Eric spent more time in the building, as he cleaned the forgotten corners and scrubbed the stains no one else noticed, he had witnessed things that didn't make sense. There were occasional whispered conversations among the upper echelons of the company, talks about deals, about shadowy figures, and about mysterious projects that were never officially disclosed. Eric had overheard these conversations, but he never understood their significance. Until now. Now it seemed clear to him that Bridges Enterprises wasn't just a corporation. It was a front. A front for something far more dangerous, far more powerful. The company's success, Susan's rapid rise, her wealth. Nothing added up unless there was something deeper going on. Eric had seen enough of the company to know that the infrastructure was built on secrets. There were hidden rooms, secret files, whispers of things not for public knowledge. Eric had always thought that Susan's empire was just a reflection of her hard work, her genius. But what if it wasn't just about business? What if Bridges Enterprises was part of something much larger? Something that involved Barbara and Beatrice more directly than anyone realized. Eric couldn't escape the feeling that the twins were the key to something that could explain everything. Their unusual behavior, their strange connection to one another, the way they never seemed to act like other children, all of it pointed to one inescapable truth. Susan's twins were not just ordinary children. Susan had hidden them away for a reason. But why? Why had she gone to such lengths to shield them from the world? What was the connection between the twins and the strange forces that seemed to surround Bridges Enterprises? And more importantly, what would happen if those forces found them? Eric could feel the tension tightening around him, like the strings of a web that had already been woven. The truth, what he had just begun to scratch the surface of, was more complicated, more dangerous than anything he could have ever imagined. As much as he wanted to walk away, to turn a blind eye and forget what he had seen, he knew that wasn't possible anymore. The twins weren't just the product of a wealthy family, they were connected to something far darker. As his suspicion grew, so did his determination to uncover the truth. He couldn't stop now, not when everything he had known was beginning to unravel. The town of Charlestown had never seen anything like this before. Susan's disappearance was just the beginning. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of secrecy, and Eric was going to find it. But as he dug deeper into the mystery, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't the only one looking for answers. Eric sat hunched over the old wooden desk in the janitor's closet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the room. The small space was filled with cleaning supplies, dust-covered shelves, and forgotten mops. Yet tonight, it felt like the epicenter of something far darker than anything he'd ever known. His hands shook as he clutched the photographs. Their disturbing images still burned into his mind. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, innocent in appearance, yet the secrets they held were far from childlike. He had never suspected any of this, not even when Susan Bridges had hired him all those years ago. She had been the epitome of success, a billionaire CEO, poised, polished, admired by all. From the outside, Susan's life seemed perfect. The powerful empire, the beautiful children, the wealth that seemed limitless. But the discovery he'd made in that maintenance closet was only the beginning of a twisted truth that Eric was now compelled to uncover. His mind raced as he pieced together what he had learned so far. They know about the girls. What did Susan mean? Who was she protecting them from? And what did it all have to do with the legacy of power and wealth that had built Bridges Enterprises? Eric's breath hitched as his thoughts swirled, unable to grasp the depth of what he was now involved in. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He couldn't stop now. Not when Susan's past, and the horrifying truth it held, was just waiting to be revealed. The search for answers was exhausting, both mentally and physically. Eric had always been a man of routine, content to fade into the background and let life pass by. But now he found himself driven by an unfamiliar urgency, a need to understand the labyrinth of lies that Susan had carefully constructed. He had spent countless hours in the basement of Bridges Enterprises, combing through old company records and personal files he had never been meant to see. The employees' personal details, business documents, and everything in between. Everything was meticulously organized, but the deeper he dug, the more the web of deceit unraveled. Eric found things he wasn't supposed to find, files that were clearly meant to be buried forever. Confidential documents, names of mysterious benefactors, and cryptic messages left behind by Susan herself. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about a life lived in shadows, with secrets so dark that they could tear everything apart if brought to light. He pieced together the pattern. Susan had always been more than just a self-made businesswoman. Her rise to power had been too fast, too clean, and too flawless. There was no natural progression, no struggle or hardship that typically accompanied success. The wealth had come swiftly and without explanation. And now, Eric could see the answer. She had made a deal. One night, deep in the catacombs of Bridges Enterprises, Eric stumbled upon a file that made his heart stop. It was a series of documents, cryptic and coded, with references to a shadowy organization that had been operating in the dark corners of the world for decades. The names were hidden, the details vague, but the connections were clear. Susan had entered into a pact, a deal, years before she built her empire. The truth of it was chilling. Eric read the file again, his mind struggling to understand the magnitude of what he had uncovered. The organization Susan had allied herself with was no mere business conglomerate. They were something more sinister, a group whose reach extended far beyond the boundaries of normal commerce, with connections to politics, wealth, and darker forces. The price of Susan's success, her wealth, her position in society, had been the children she carried. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, were born not out of love or desire, but as part of a twisted agreement, a transaction of sorts. The details were sparse, but it was clear that the organization had known from the beginning what Susan's children were capable of. The twins weren't simply the product of two failed marriages. They were part of something much larger, something that had been planned before their conception. Susan had tried to protect them, hiding them away from prying eyes, keeping them isolated from the world. But the more Eric read, the more he understood. The twins were not ordinary children. They were born from a legacy of power, dark power, inherited from forces far older than anyone could imagine. And that power was the key to the deal Susan had made. The horrifying reality began to take shape. The twins had been born for a reason. The organization needed them. Eric's hands trembled as he turned the pages of the document, his mind racing with the implications of everything he had just read. The file revealed that Susan had been working for years to escape the grip of the organization. It wasn't just about her fortune or business. It was about her children. She had made the decision to break free, but the cost of that freedom was far greater than she had anticipated. The more Eric uncovered, the more he understood that Susan's disappearance hadn't been voluntary. The police and the media had assumed that she had either run away or been kidnapped, but the truth was much darker. Susan had been forced to flee, to go into hiding because the organization had learned that she was trying to escape their grasp. They had sent their agents to find her, and they would stop at nothing to get her, and the twins, back. But Susan hadn't just disappeared. No, she had been planning this escape for years, carefully covering her tracks, hiding the twins from the world, keeping them safe from the very people who wanted to use them. The files Eric had uncovered detailed a series of hidden accounts, secret hideaways, and encrypted messages that Susan had left behind for anyone who might one day stumble upon them. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for: the discovery by Eric, the humble janitor, who had no idea what he was getting into. Eric's mind whirled with the implications. The twins' powers, which had been suppressed and hidden by Susan for so long, were now exposed. The organization knew about them, and they were coming. For them. And Eric was the only one who knew the truth. As Eric sat in the small, dimly lit closet, he realized that he was now caught in a game far larger than he could have ever imagined. The fate of the twins, Susan's legacy, and the town of Charlestown itself were all tied to this mysterious organization, and it wasn't going to stop until it had everything it wanted. Eric knew he couldn't go to the police, not with what he had uncovered. They were already in over their heads. The organization was too powerful, too pervasive. No one would believe him if he tried to explain what he'd found. His only option now was to protect the twins. He had no idea how, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let them fall into the hands of the people who were hunting them. Not now. Not when they were the key to something far more dangerous than anyone realized. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Eric's heart raced as the sudden sound broke through the oppressive silence. He quickly stuffed the papers back into their folder and slid them into his coat pocket, praying that whoever was outside hadn't heard him. The door creaked open just a crack, and a familiar voice echoed in from the other side. "Eric, you in there?" It was Henry, one of the building's night security guards. Eric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "I'm here, Henry." Just finishing up." Henry stepped inside, his face creased with concern. "I heard about Susan. Terrible business, huh?" Eric nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, terrible." Henry paused, his eyes narrowing. "Something feels off, you know. Something doesn't sit right about all this. I've seen some weird things around here lately, stuff that doesn't add up." Eric gave a tight smile. "It's all just rumors. Don't get caught up in it." Henry seemed to buy it, but as he turned to leave, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that the old security guard knew more than he was letting on. His instincts told him that Henry's curiosity was more dangerous than anything he had uncovered in the darkened halls of Bridges Enterprises. Eric's pulse hammered in his chest as he sat in the darkened maintenance closet, staring at the old, yellowed files he had stolen from Susan's private stash. The more he uncovered about the Bridges family, the more his world began to shift. What he had once thought were isolated incidents, strange behaviors, cryptic notes, hushed conversations, were now unraveling into something far more sinister than he could have imagined. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, were the key to it all, and not just any key. Their existence, their very bloodline, carried an unimaginable force, one that Susan had tried desperately to suppress, one that had been kept hidden for years. Eric's fingers trembled as he ran over the papers, piecing together the secrets Susan had kept from the world. The twins were not ordinary children. The documents in front of Eric were a chaotic mess of disjointed notes, ancient symbols, and cryptic references to powers beyond understanding. But as he sifted through the papers, one phrase kept standing out: genetic anomaly. It was a phrase that Susan had scrawled on nearly every piece of correspondence. The more Eric read, the more the truth became clear. The twins' powers were not the result of any normal genetics. They were something else entirely, something ancient, inherited from a line of people who had existed long before Susan Bridges or the Bridges family. Eric was no expert in genetics or ancient history, but he could feel the weight of what he was reading. It wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about a legacy of dark forces stretching back centuries. The twins were born from a genetic anomaly, a rare and dangerous mutation that had been passed down from generation to generation. Their abilities were not natural. They were the product of something far older, something far darker. The abilities the twins possessed were unlike anything Eric had ever encountered. According to the documents, these powers had been suppressed, hidden from the world by Susan, who had been terrified of what they might do if unleashed. The twins had the ability to manipulate reality itself. Their connection to the world around them was not bound by normal human limitations. They could alter the very fabric of existence, create things, destroy things, shift time and space. It was an uncontrollable power, one that even Susan, with all her resources, had been unable to fully comprehend. Eric felt his stomach turn as he realized the full scope of what he was dealing with. The twins were not simply the offspring of a billionaire CEO. They were the living embodiment of a terrifying power that could change the course of history. But Susan had hidden them, kept them away from the world, away from the organization that had been watching her family for so long. And she had done everything in her power to suppress their abilities, to keep them under control. The fear in Susan's heart was palpable in the documents, her desperate attempts to protect her children from the very thing that made them so dangerous. Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. The more he uncovered, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. But there was one thing he now understood with horrifying clarity. The organization that had manipulated Susan for so long was after the twins. They had known about their powers from the beginning, and they would stop at nothing to control them. The twins were not just a threat to Susan and her family. They were a threat to the world. The organization had made a deal with Susan long ago, promising her wealth and power in exchange for her children. They had always known that Barbara and Beatrice were special, but they had underestimated the true extent of their abilities. Susan had been trying to escape the organization's grasp for years, and Eric now understood why. If the organization found the twins, they would use their powers for unspeakable purposes, to control governments, manipulate economies, and reshape the world according to their twisted agenda. The twins were the key to a future that Susan had feared, a future that could change everything about the way the world operated. Eric's mind raced as he pieced together the clues. The twins weren't just the product of a business deal gone wrong. They were part of something much larger, a plan that had been set in motion long before their births. The organization had been watching Susan and her family for years, biding their time until they could seize control of the twins' abilities, and now that Susan had disappeared, they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Eric's eyes lingered on a specific document, a timeline of events that had been carefully outlined by Susan herself. It showed her gradual rise to power, the deals she had made, and the years of manipulation she had endured. But there was a chilling detail at the bottom of the page. The twins must be found. They are the key to everything. The words were underlined in bold ink, as if to emphasize the urgency of the situation. It was clear now. The twins were not just victims in this game. They were the center of it all, and the organization would stop at nothing to control them. Eric felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized the full scope of the threat the twins represented. What they could do was unimaginable. Time, space, reality itself. These were concepts that had no meaning when it came to the twins. And Susan had known that. She had known that the moment they were born, they would be targeted by forces far more powerful than she could ever have imagined. Eric thought back to the twins' behavior, their strange connection to one another, how they spoke in whispers, how they moved as if they were of the same mind, always in sync, always connected. He had thought it was just a quirk of their personalities, but now he understood. They weren't just playing pretend. They were communicating in a way that no one else could understand. They were connected to one another, to something deeper, something far older. It was then that Eric realized the true danger of what they could do. If the twins' powers were unleashed, they could tear apart the very fabric of reality. They could change the world or destroy it. Eric's mind raced as he tried to understand what he had uncovered. He had always believed that the world worked in simple, predictable ways. But now, the lines between reality and the unknown had blurred. He was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into a void that he could barely comprehend. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had no choice but to act. The organization would stop at nothing to find the twins. They would do anything to control their powers. Eric's only hope was to protect them, to keep them hidden, safe from the forces that were closing in on them. But as Eric sat there, the weight of the truth settled in his bones. There was no going back now. The secrets he had uncovered had set something in motion, and there was no telling how far it would go. Eric stood up, his legs aching beneath him as he shuffled toward the door. His heart pounded in his chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. He couldn't go back to his quiet, unnoticed life anymore. The past weeks had changed everything. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. He needed to find the twins. He needed to warn them before the organization found them first. But with every moment that passed, Eric felt the walls closing in. The organization would be looking for them, for him. The clock was ticking, and he didn't know how much time he had left. As he stepped into the darkened halls of Bridges Enterprises, Eric felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The truth was out there now, and there was no escaping it. The twins were the key to everything, and the power they held could either save the world or destroy it. Eric's decision had been made, and there was no going back. Eric's heart raced as he wheeled his cart down the dimly lit hallway of Bridges Enterprises, the silence of the building almost suffocating. It was an eerie calm in the aftermath of everything he had discovered. The weight of the past weeks hung over him like a storm cloud, a cloud that only seemed to grow darker with every passing second. The secrets he had uncovered about Susan Bridges, the twins, and the shadowy organization that had been pulling the strings for years threatened to shatter everything. And now, it seemed, the organization knew that he had discovered the truth. Eric had lived a quiet, unnoticed life for decades. He had swept the floors, mopped the hallways, and wiped down the windows, all while observing the comings and goings of Bridges Enterprises. He had seen it all. The rise of Susan Bridges from a small-time entrepreneur to a self-made billionaire. He had seen her children grow, the twins, Barbara and Beatrice, and the way Susan had sheltered them, always keeping them close. But now, the company was no longer the lively, thriving empire it once was. Since Susan's disappearance, it felt like a tomb. The air in the building was cold, oppressive. The hum of activity that had once filled the halls was now replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. There was something about the way the shadows seemed to move, the way the silence seemed to stretch on longer than it should have. He knew the organization was closing in. They had always been watching, always waiting for the moment when they could claim what they had long been after, the twins and the power they held. Eric had just finished his rounds in the north wing of the building when he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible click, followed by a low hum that reverberated through the walls. He froze, his pulse quickening. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was it a malfunction in the building? A loose pipe? Or had the organization found him? Before he could think any further, the sound was followed by the unmistakable thud of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the stairwell. Eric's breath hitched. He turned to face the elevator, but it was already too late. Two men, dressed in dark suits and sunglasses, stepped into the hallway, their faces obscured in the low light. Eric didn't need to ask who they were. The cold, menacing aura around them gave them away immediately. These were not ordinary men. These were agents, sent by the organization to eliminate him, to ensure that he would never speak of what he had uncovered. "Eric Donald," one of the men spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You've been poking around in places you shouldn't have." Eric's mind raced. He had no way of escaping. The building was too large, too labyrinthine, and his legs were too weak to outrun them. The men advanced slowly, calculating, as if they knew every move he would make before he even made it. "You've seen what you shouldn't have," the other man continued. "You've discovered things that would have remained buried forever. But now that you know the truth—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You're a liability." Eric's heart thudded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had spent his entire life keeping his head down, watching from the shadows, never interfering. But this was different. The truth about Susan's legacy, about the twins, about the sinister forces that had been manipulating everything for decades, it was too much to ignore. Eric had to make a choice. The two agents moved toward him, their steps deliberate and unhurried. Eric's mind raced, his breath shallow as he tried to think of a way out. But his options were limited. His only chance was to confront them, to act fast. He reached down into the cart, his hands trembling. The janitor's cart was the last place anyone would think to search for a weapon. But there, underneath the rags and cleaning supplies, Eric had hidden a small, rusted wrench, his only defense against the agents who were closing in on him. He gripped it tightly, his knuckles whitening. With a burst of adrenaline, Eric swung the wrench at the first agent. The blow connected with the man's shoulder, causing him to stagger back in surprise. But the agent quickly regained his balance, his expression unchanging. The second agent reached for something in his coat, a weapon of his own. But before he could draw it, a sharp voice interrupted. "Stop!" Eric turned to see the twins, Barbara and Beatrice, standing at the end of the hallway. Their small figures were bathed in the dim light from the ceiling, their faces impassive. The twins weren't running or hiding. They stood there, unafraid, their eyes locked on the two men. The agents froze, momentarily caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the children. Eric, too, felt a jolt of surprise. How had they gotten here? They should have been safe, hidden away from the chaos. But there they were, standing with an air of calm authority that sent a chill down Eric's spine. The twins' presence seemed to stop time itself. The agents, who had been advancing toward Eric only moments before, now stood motionless. Their expressions were no longer those of confident men in control. They looked uncertain. "It's too late," Barbara spoke, her voice eerily calm for a child her age. "You can't stop what's coming." The words sent a shockwave through Eric's chest. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way they were said, the wisdom in their voices, far beyond their years, that made his blood run cold. Barbara and Beatrice weren't just children anymore. They were something else entirely. "We know what you've been sent to do," Beatrice added, her voice matching her twins in its unsettling serenity. "But you can't hurt us. You can't hurt him." The agents seemed to hesitate, their hands twitching toward their weapons, but there was a moment of doubt in their eyes. Eric could see it, as clear as day. They weren't sure what to do now. The twins had interrupted their mission, and the power they exuded was palpable. Eric's pulse quickened. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. The twins had control over this situation, and that scared the agents more than anything. One of the agents stepped forward, his voice shaky. "This is a mistake. We're here to eliminate you both. The organization—" The agent never finished his sentence. With a sudden, swift motion, Beatrice raised her hand. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop in an instant, and the air became thick, heavy, as if the very atmosphere itself were shifting. The agent's body jerked backward, as if an invisible force had slammed into him, sending him crashing into the far wall with bone-jarring force. The second agent's eyes widened in horror as he reached for his gun. But before he could even aim, Barbara raised her hand, and the weapon slipped from his grasp, falling harmlessly to the floor. "What the hell?" The agent's words were cut off as his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed, unable to move. Eric stared in awe. He had heard rumors, whispers about the twins' abilities, but seeing it in person was something entirely different. He had no idea the extent of their power. They weren't just children with a strange connection. They were forces of nature, capable of doing things that no one, not even the most powerful people, could comprehend. The agents lay unconscious on the floor, their bodies still and unmoving. Barbara and Beatrice turned toward Eric, their faces softening as they approached. "Thank you," Barbara said simply. Eric, still in shock, could barely find his voice. What are you?" Beatrice's eyes locked onto his. "We're more than you think, Eric. But it's not over. Not yet." The twins' words weighed heavily on Eric as he helped them carefully move the unconscious agents out of sight. He had barely understood what had just transpired, but one thing was certain. He had no choice but to help them now. The organization would stop at nothing to reclaim the twins, to harness their powers for their own twisted ends. Eric's decision had been made. He could no longer stand on the sidelines. The truth about Susan, the twins, and the organization was far too dangerous to keep hidden. The only way to stop them, to stop the nightmare from consuming everything, was to fight back. With the twins at his side, Eric began to piece together a plan. He would need to dig deeper into the organization's network, uncover its leaders, and expose them to the world. But it wouldn't be easy. They were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to silence him. The battle for the twins' future, and for the truth, was only just beginning. The night had fallen over Charlestown like a shroud, thick and suffocating, and the air felt charged, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. The streetlights flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. The once peaceful town was about to be thrust into a state of chaos that would leave its inhabitants forever changed. Eric stood in the center of the town square, his hands clenched tightly by his sides, his mind racing. The confrontation with the agents had been only the beginning. The twins had unleashed a power that no one could have predicted, and now the full extent of what they were capable of was about to unfold before his eyes. What had started as a small discovery in the maintenance closet had quickly escalated into something that would alter the very fabric of reality. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, stood in front of him, their small frames emanating an energy so potent that it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. They were no longer the innocent children he had once known. The power that flowed through them was ancient, untamed, and unstoppable. The world was about to see just how much. Eric's heart hammered in his chest as he turned to look at the twins. They were silent now, their faces unreadable. It was clear that they knew what was about to happen. This was their destiny, their legacy, something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It happened in an instant. One moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the town, the rustling of the trees, and the distant sounds of a few late-night conversations. The next, the ground beneath Eric's feet began to tremble, the very earth vibrating with an unseen force. The streetlights flickered and then shattered, sending glass shattering to the ground like raindrops. The buildings around them seemed to lean, their foundations groaning under the weight of an unseen pressure. The twins, standing perfectly still, closed their eyes. Their hands were at their sides, fingers twitching as if they were controlling the pulse of the world around them. A low, guttural sound began to rise from deep within the earth, a hum so deep that Eric could feel it in his bones. And then the storm broke. Beatrice raised her hand first, slowly, as if beckoning something from the very depths of the universe. The sky above them, which had been starless just moments before, suddenly split open, a flash of brilliant, blinding light pouring from the heavens. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't thunder. It was as if the very fabric of space itself was tearing open. The wind howled, violently slamming into Eric's face, pushing him back. The twins, now surrounded by an ethereal glow, stood firm, their eyes glowing with a power that sent chills through his spine. The ground cracked beneath them, and the air grew thick with energy, heavy and oppressive. What are you doing?" Eric whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the unfolding chaos. "They know," Barbara's voice rang out, sharp and clear, despite the deafening roar of the wind. "They can't stop us now!" And then, the reality around them began to shift. The buildings around them seemed to warp and twist, their outlines blurring as if the very laws of physics were being rewritten. The town square buckled, the pavement rising in jagged shards. Eric's legs shook, and he stumbled backward, horrified by what he was witnessing. People were screaming in the distance as the once stable town was ripped apart at its seams. But the twins were not just causing destruction. They were altering the very fabric of reality. The streets began to glow with an unnatural light, and the sky above seemed to pulse with a rhythm, as if the universe itself was breathing in time with the twins. Eric's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just power. It was a force of nature, something primal and ancient. He looked back at the twins, their faces serene in the midst of the chaos. They weren't scared. They weren't trying to stop it. They were in control. The buildings around them shuddered and began to crumble, but the twins didn't flinch. Instead, their powers seemed to reach outward, extending across the town like tendrils of energy. The ground quaked beneath Eric's feet, and he had to grip the nearest lamppost to keep himself from falling. As the chaos continued, the town of Charlestown began to unravel before their very eyes. The once sturdy streets, the homes, the familiar landmarks, everything seemed to disintegrate into chaos. People poured into the streets, fleeing in panic, but it was clear that nothing could outrun what was happening. Buildings collapsed like paper, and the sky above them darkened as if the world was in the midst of an eclipse. Eric watched in disbelief as the town he had known for so long was torn apart, the ground shaking violently beneath him. His mind reeled with questions. What had he uncovered? What had he unleashed? He had never imagined that his discovery of the twins' secret could lead to this. But now, it was too late to turn back. As he watched the destruction unfold, Eric's thoughts turned back to Susan. What had she known? Had she understood the magnitude of her children's power? Had she known that her attempt to escape the organization would lead to this? He couldn't be sure. But one thing was clear. The truth was out, and there was no stopping it now. The twins stood before him, their expressions unreadable, their hands still raised toward the heavens. The force they had unleashed was unlike anything Eric had ever experienced, and the town was beginning to feel the full weight of it. The air crackled with energy, and Eric felt a strange pull in his chest, as though he were being drawn into the very center of the storm. The twins had become something more than human. They had become forces of nature, wielding power that could alter the course of reality itself. As the chaos reached a fever pitch, the first of the organization's agents arrived, rushing into the square with weapons drawn, determined to put an end to the destruction. But it was clear that they were outmatched. The twins had become more than anyone could handle. With a single glance, they bent the agents' weapons to their will, the metal twisting and contorting in midair, rendering them useless. The agents faltered, looking at each other in disbelief, but they knew they were no match for what was happening. The twins were in full control now, and the world around them was falling apart. Eric watched, torn between awe and fear. What had Susan done? Had she known the truth about the twins, about their abilities? The answers were still elusive, but one thing was certain. The balance of power in the town, and possibly the world, had irrevocably shifted. The twins were no longer children to be hidden or protected. They were something else, something powerful, something dangerous. And as they stood in the center of the devastation, their eyes glowing with power, Eric realized that the fate of Charlestown, and perhaps even the future of humanity, now rested in their hands. As the minutes ticked by, the town square was transformed. What had once been a peaceful, ordinary place had become a surreal landscape of chaos and energy. The laws of physics, time, and space no longer seemed to apply. People scattered in every direction, but no one could escape the ripples of power that emanated from the twins. And yet, there was something in their eyes, a quiet, almost sorrowful look, as though they understood the consequences of their actions. They weren't destroying the world out of malice. They were simply unleashing the truth of who they were, the legacy of a power that had been hidden for too long. Eric took a step back, realizing that the world was changing in front of him. He wasn't sure if it was for the better or worse, but he knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The twins weren't just children anymore. They were the future. And whatever that future looked like, it was now beyond his understanding. The power had been unleashed, and the fate of Charlestown, and perhaps the world itself, was now in the hands of the two children who had once been nothing more than a mystery. As the last of the dust settled, the once proud buildings of Charlestown lay in ruin, the landscape forever altered. The twins stood at the center, their power still swirling around them, their eyes glowing with an ancient energy that no one could comprehend. Eric, standing on the edge of the chaos, realized with a sinking heart that the consequences of their awakening were just beginning. The dust had settled over Charlestown like a heavy, oppressive blanket. What had once been a bustling town, full of life and industry, now lay in ruins. The once towering buildings were mere skeletons of their former selves, their crumbling structures casting long shadows under the dim, unnatural light that still lingered in the air. The pulse of the town, the beating heart of its community, had faltered. And in its place, there was only a haunting silence. A silence that spoke of irreversible change. Eric stood at the edge of the devastation, his body trembling with the weight of everything that had just transpired. He could still hear the echo of the twins' power vibrating in his bones, still feel the lingering shockwaves of their awakening. But it wasn't just the destruction that haunted him. It was the knowledge that the choice before him was no longer about survival. It was about fate. The fate of the twins, the fate of Charlestown, and ultimately his own. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, stood before him, their eyes glowing with an intensity that made the very air seem to thrum with energy. They were no longer the innocent girls he had once known, no longer children bound by the constraints of the world. Now, they were something else, something far more powerful. Eric's heart raced as he looked at them, the weight of Susan's warning echoing in his mind. The twins, they're not what you think. I've hidden them, hidden the truth. Susan had tried to protect them, to shield the world from what they were capable of, but now the truth was out. And Eric had to face it. He had to decide what to do with it. The wind howled through the ruined streets of Charlestown, but Eric barely felt it. His attention was fixed on the twins, who stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. The destruction around them seemed to be a reflection of the storm inside him. What was he supposed to do? What choice did he even have? The twins were a part of something much larger than any of them had realized. Their powers, which had been suppressed by Susan for so long, were now fully awakened. And with that awakening came an undeniable truth. They were destined for something far greater than anyone had understood. They were not merely the products of a twisted organization, the byproducts of some dark pact. They were forces of nature, capable of reshaping the world as they knew it. Eric had learned the hard way that the twins were not just the children of Susan Bridges. They were the children of a destiny that had been passed down through generations, a legacy tied to ancient, unknown powers that had always been there, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. He thought back to the photographs he had found in the maintenance closet, the blurry images of the twins with shadowy figures, their faces obscured. Susan had warned him. She had known, deep down, that this day would come. But what had she wanted him to do? Why had she entrusted him with this knowledge, someone so far removed from her world? Eric's mind reeled. On one hand, the twins' abilities, if harnessed properly, could reshape the very fabric of humanity. They could be the key to an evolution, an ascension to a new era. But on the other hand, there was the dark side of that power, the same power that could destroy everything. If the wrong people or the wrong organization gained control of the twins, the consequences would be catastrophic. Eric's pulse quickened as the realization settled deep within him. He had a choice to make, and it wasn't an easy one. He could stand by, do nothing, and allow the twins to fulfill their destiny, allow them to embrace their power and reshape the world as they saw fit. It could be a world of peace, of hope, of renewal. But there was no guarantee. What if they lost control? What if their power tore the world apart instead? Or he could try to stop them. He could attempt to sever the link between the twins and their destiny. But that would mean betraying everything they had become, everything they had fought for. It would mean risking the wrath of the organization that had been manipulating them for so long. It would mean the collapse of everything that had been built. Eric knew one thing for certain. No matter what choice he made, there would be no turning back. He looked at the twins again, his heart heavy with the weight of their shared history. They were no longer innocent girls in need of protection. They were something more, something ancient, something powerful. The world was not ready for what they could bring, and Eric wasn't sure if he was ready either. Beatrice spoke, her voice calm but carrying the weight of someone far older than her years. You've seen what we can do. You've seen the consequences of our power. But you must decide, Eric. You can help us shape the world, or you can try to stop us. But know this. There is no neutral ground. Barbara's eyes softened as she added, We've already changed the course of this town, and now we must change the world. But we cannot do it alone. Eric swallowed hard. The choice was his. He had never thought of himself as a hero, never thought he could make a difference in the world. He was just a janitor, a man who lived in the shadows of the great empire Susan had built. But now, everything had shifted. Now his role was far more significant than he could have ever imagined. Eric took a deep breath, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The world as he knew it had already changed. The town of Charlestown was in ruins, its people scattered and broken. He had to ask himself, could he live with the consequences of either decision? If he helped the twins, the world could be reshaped. They had the power to heal, to uplift, to renew. They could bring an end to the suffering that had plagued humanity for so long. But was it worth the risk? Was he willing to trust in their vision of the future? Could he trust them to wield their power responsibly? If he tried to stop them, he would be fighting against fate itself. He would be turning his back on the twins, on the legacy that had been passed down through generations. The organization that had been manipulating Susan and her family for so long would stop at nothing to get their hands on the twins, and Eric would be in their crosshairs. If he tried to shut it all down, he would be sacrificing everything, including the twins' chance for a better future. There was no easy answer, and Eric knew that whatever choice he made, it would come with consequences that would echo far beyond Charlestown. He turned to the twins, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. What do you want from me? What is your vision for the world? Barbara stepped forward, her expression fierce. We want to change everything. We want to take the power that's been hidden from us and use it to reshape this world. We can end suffering, bring peace, and lead humanity to a new age. Beatrice's voice was softer but just as resolute. But we can't do it without your help. You've seen what we can do. You've seen the forces at play. We need you, Eric. Eric looked out over the ruins of Charlestown, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He had lived his entire life in the shadows, content to keep his distance from the world's problems. But now, the choice had been thrust upon him. The world was shifting around him, and there was no escaping it. I'll help you, Eric said, his voice thick with emotion. But we do this carefully. We do this with caution. The world may not be ready for the kind of change you're talking about. But I'll stand with you. I'll stand with you no matter the cost. The twins exchanged a glance, a look of understanding passing between them. They knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, but they were no longer children. They were forces of nature, and with Eric by their side, they would face whatever came next. As Eric made his choice, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The decision had been made. The course was set. There was no turning back, but for the first time in a long time, Eric felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. The twins were ready to lead the world into a new age, and Eric had chosen to walk that path with them. The town of Charlestown, shattered and broken as it was, would be the starting point for something far greater. And as Eric looked at the twins, standing tall and powerful in front of him, he realized that the world would never be the same again. Charlestown was no longer recognizable. Where once there were bustling streets and thriving communities, there were now hollow echoes and smoldering ruins. The familiar hum of the town's quiet, everyday life was now replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional whispers of survivors and the distant rumblings of chaos. Buildings lay in ruins. Bridges Enterprises, once the symbol of power and wealth, was reduced to a skeletal frame, its windows shattered, its walls scorched and torn as if the very bones of the earth had been ripped apart. Eric Donald stood amidst the destruction, his frail, weathered hands trembling as he surveyed the wreckage. His mind swirled with memories of the events that had unfolded, each moment more impossible than the last. What had begun as a mystery, a simple disappearance, had culminated in a catastrophe that no one could have predicted. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, had been the catalyst. Their powers, locked away for so long, had finally been unleashed. And in the aftermath of their awakening, Charlestown had become a testament to the overwhelming force they possessed. It wasn't just the physical damage that weighed heavily on Eric's heart. It was the knowledge that the world was about to change forever. The twins had awakened something ancient, something far beyond anyone's understanding, and now that power had irrevocably altered the course of reality. Eric had lived his entire life in the shadows. As a janitor, he had never been more than an invisible figure in the background of life's drama. But now, he was a part of something far greater than himself. He had been thrust into the heart of a legacy he never knew existed, one that tied him to the twins and to a force that could either save or destroy everything. The truth, the terrible truth, was that Eric had never truly been an innocent bystander in all of this. He had always assumed he was just a man who cleaned the floors, who watched the comings and goings of the powerful without ever being involved. But now, with the ruins of Charlestown at his feet and the future of humanity hanging in the balance, Eric could no longer deny his role. He was part of the legacy of the twins. He was bound to their fate just as surely as they were tied to the forces that had manipulated their lives. It was as though a cosmic thread had always linked him to them, waiting for the right moment to pull him into the center of the storm. And that moment had come. Eric's decision to help the twins, to stand by them as they awakened their powers, had irrevocably changed him. He was no longer the same man who had quietly observed life from the sidelines. He was now part of the very story that would shape the world. And with that realization came a crushing weight of responsibility. The twins, for all their innocence, were not just children. They were the heirs to a power that could either rebuild the world or tear it apart. It had all started with a simple, inexplicable moment. The moment Susan Bridges had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but a cryptic note behind. The mystery of her disappearance had captivated the town of Charlestown, but it was only a glimpse into something far more sinister, far more dangerous. The twins' powers, long suppressed, had finally broken free. And when they did, the world around them had been forced to bend. In the final confrontation, the twins had faced the shadowy organization that had controlled their lives for so long. These faceless, manipulative figures had orchestrated everything, from Susan's rise to power to the birth of the twins themselves. They had known what the twins were capable of, and they had feared what would happen if the twins ever learned the full extent of their abilities. But what they hadn't anticipated was the twins' connection to Eric. They hadn't known that the janitor, a man who had spent his life in the background, would be the one to uncover the truth. Eric had helped them awaken their powers, not just in physical terms, but in understanding. With his help, the twins had realized they were not just the product of a twisted deal, not just pawns in a dangerous game. They were a force of nature, beings with the power to reshape reality itself. When the twins unleashed their powers in full force, the town of Charlestown had been the first casualty. The buildings crumbled, the earth trembled, and the skies themselves seemed to warp. The town had literally been torn apart by the energy radiating from the twins. It was as though the fabric of reality itself had been torn, and in its place, a new, unstable world had emerged. The destruction was not just physical. It was emotional, psychological. The people of Charlestown, who had lived their entire lives in the safety of a small, ordinary town, had now been forced to confront a reality they never could have imagined. The rules of the world had changed, and the consequences were far-reaching. As the dust began to settle, Eric looked around him. The survivors, if there were any, would have to rebuild, but the town they had once known was gone. The twins, Barbara and Beatrice, were no longer the innocent girls they had once been. They had transcended that innocence, becoming something beyond human understanding. They were both the salvation and the destruction of the world, and now, with the knowledge of what they were capable of, there would be no turning back. The question now was, what came next? The world had been forced to reckon with the power of the twins. Governments, organizations, and powerful individuals would all seek to control them, to harness their abilities for their own gain. But Eric knew better than anyone that the twins couldn't be controlled. They were too powerful, too untamed. And so, as he stood among the remnants of Charlestown, Eric knew that his role was far from over. He had chosen to stand with the twins, to help them navigate the legacy they had inherited. But now, he had to face a new reality. The world was watching. The organization that had sought to control the twins would stop at nothing to reclaim them. And Eric, once a quiet janitor, would have to fight, not just for his own survival, but for the survival of everything the twins represented. As the days passed and the town began to heal, the true consequences of what had happened started to take shape. Charlestown might be gone, but the world was forever changed. Eric's life and the lives of the twins were now tied to a destiny that was far beyond their understanding. Eric knew that he had made the right choice. He had stood with the twins when no one else would. But that choice came with a price. The future of the world and the twins was uncertain. They had the power to change everything, to create a new world, or to destroy the old one entirely. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding the legacy they carried, the power they held, and the responsibility they had to the world. Eric had become part of that legacy, whether he wanted to or not. And as the town of Charlestown lay in ruins, Eric knew that the true battle had only just begun. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Whatever came next, Eric would stand with the twins. He would help them fulfill their destiny. And together, they would face the consequences of the awakening they had caused, and the new world they had begun to shape. What you just listened to isn't just a story. It's a reflection of life's most powerful moments, the ones we never see coming, the choices we make, the consequences that follow. But most of all, how one action can echo through everything. If you felt something deep within you, something that still lingers, subscribe now. Join us for more stories that aren't just meant to be told, but lived. Because the hardest truths are often the ones we're most afraid to face.